On my 85th birthday, I thought my son finally remembered I existed when he invited me over for a celebration. I walked in with hope in my heart, expecting maybe a hug or a kind word after years of being treated like garbage. Instead, while his family watched, he walked up to me, looked me in the eyes, and spit directly on my face. Then he called me a loser and said I deserved it. I wiped his spit off my cheek, reached into my pocket, pulled out my keys, and walked out forever. But what I did next destroyed everything he had. Before that, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe to this channel so that my stories can reach more people. I raised my son alone from the day he was born because his mother died during childbirth, and I never got the chance to even introduce them to each other. I never remarried after that because every ounce of my energy and focus went into being both parents for this baby who needed me. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously for 18 years straight so he could attend the best private schools while other kids in our neighborhood went to public school. He went to college without a single dollar of debt while his classmates drowned in student loans they'd be paying off for decades. I paid for his first apartment when he graduated so he could start his career without the burden of living with roommates or moving back home with me. I gave him $50,000 as seed money for his first business venture when he came to me with a plan and a dream. I co-signed loans when banks wouldn't trust him because he had no credit history or collateral to offer them. I spent my entire life savings making sure he had every opportunity and advantage I never had growing up poor in a rough neighborhood. I sacrificed my health working those 3 jobs until my back gave out permanently and I had to have surgery just to walk without screaming pain. I sacrificed my youth because I had no time for friends or hobbies or dating or any kind of personal life outside of work and parenting. I sacrificed every dream I ever had for myself because my only dream became watching my son succeed and become someone important. And he did succeed beyond anything I could have imagined possible when I was changing his diapers and teaching him to walk. By the time he turned 35 years old, he owned a thriving tech consulting company that had offices in 3 states. He lived in a massive $4 million mansion in the wealthiest suburb in the entire state. He drove luxury cars that cost more than I earned in 5 years of working. He wore suits that cost thousands of dollars and watches that cost more than my yearly rent. He had a beautiful wife who came from money and 2 smart, handsome sons who went to elite private schools. He had everything anyone could ever want, and his life looked absolutely perfect in every photo he posted on social media. I was so incredibly proud of him, I could barely breathe sometimes when I thought about the struggling, crying baby I held in the hospital 35 years ago and looked at the powerful, confident man he became. But somewhere during his climb from my cramped 2-bedroom apartment to his enormous mansion, something fundamental changed in how he saw me, and I didn't notice it happening until the damage was already done. It happened so gradually over the years that I kept making excuses and telling myself I was imagining things. He stopped seeing me as the father who sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. He started seeing me as an embarrassment and a reminder of the poverty he came from that he wanted to erase from his perfect new life. The man who worked 3 jobs and went without meals so he could afford private school tutors now got introduced vaguely to his wealthy friends as just my dad, with no stories about what I did or who I was or what I meant to him. The father who gave him $50,000 to start his business and co-signed loans when nobody else would trust him now got treated like a stupid burden who didn't understand his sophisticated world of corporate deals and venture capital and business strategy and networking events. The humiliation and disrespect started small about 5 years ago, right after his business really exploded and serious money started pouring into his bank accounts. He forgot to invite me to Thanksgiving dinner that year, and when I called him asking what time I should arrive at his house, he acted genuinely surprised, like he didn't realize I would expect an invitation to spend the holiday with my only son and his family. He started introducing me very vaguely to his wealthy friends and business associates at company events, saying just, "This is my dad," with absolutely no explanation of who I was, or what I meant to him, or what role I played in his success. He asked me not to wear my old man clothes when I visited his house because his neighbors might see me arriving or leaving and get the wrong impression about his family and their status in the community. He told me my car was too ugly to park in his driveway when his friends came over, so I should park down the street and walk up to his house instead of pulling into his circular driveway like a normal guest. Then the comments and insults became much more direct and cruel, and each one felt like a knife cutting into my chest and twisting. He called me pathetic for still living in my small rent-controlled apartment, instead of moving somewhere nicer and more respectable that wouldn't embarrass him when people asked where his father lived. He called me embarrassing for driving my 20-year-old Honda Civic that still ran perfectly fine and got good gas mileage, but looked shabby and poor next to his collection of luxury vehicles. He called me useless and stupid because I didn't understand his business world of tech consulting and venture capital investments and corporate acquisitions and stockholder meetings. He mocked my clothes every time he saw me, saying I dressed like a homeless person. He mocked my haircut, saying I looked like I cut it myself with kitchen scissors. He mocked my outdated flip phone, saying I was too dumb to learn how to use a smartphone. He mocked my lack of social media presence, saying I was basically invisible to the modern world. He mocked my simple way of talking, saying I sounded uneducated and ignorant compared to his polished business vocabulary. Each insult carved deeper and deeper wounds into my heart, but I stayed completely silent and never fought back or defended myself because he was my son and I loved him desperately despite all his cruelty toward me. I told myself over and over that he was just stressed from the pressure of running a big company. I told myself he didn't really mean the things he said the way they sounded to my ears. I told myself that deep down underneath all the money and success he still loved me and appreciated everything I sacrificed to give him the life he now enjoyed. I made excuses for his behavior to myself because accepting the horrible truth was too painful to bear. The truth was that my son had become genuinely ashamed of me and everything I represented. The truth was that he saw me as a walking reminder of the poverty and struggle he came from and desperately wanted to erase from his new, perfect, wealthy life. The truth was that the baby boy I raised with unconditional love and devotion had grown into a cold, cruel man who felt nothing but contempt and disgust for his own elderly father who gave up everything for him. My 85th birthday fell on a Saturday this year, and for once in a very long time, my son actually called me personally on the phone to invite me to his home, instead of just sending a brief text message or having his wife call me on his behalf. Not just a casual mention, but him actually picking up the phone himself and using his own voice to say he wanted me there for what he called a special family celebration of my birthday. My heart absolutely soared with hope and excitement that maybe he was finally remembering who I was and who he used to be before all the money and success changed everything between us. Maybe he was remembering all those birthdays throughout his childhood when I worked double shifts and overtime so I could afford to buy him the expensive toys and video games he wanted. Maybe turning 85 was significant enough that he was finally seeing me as his father again, instead of an embarrassment he needed to hide from his wealthy social circle. I spent the entire week leading up to my birthday feeling excited and nervous, like a little child waiting for Christmas morning to arrive. I went out and bought new clothes from a nicer store than I usually shopped at because I hoped they wouldn't embarrass him in front of his sophisticated family. I got a proper haircut at an actual salon instead of the cheap barber shop I normally use to save money. I even paid to have my old beat-up car professionally detailed and washed so it would look somewhat presentable when I parked it in his driveway next to all his expensive luxury vehicles. I spent hours rehearsing things I could say during dinner that wouldn't make me sound stupid or outdated or ignorant in front of his brilliant wife and his intelligent, well-educated children who went to elite private schools. When I finally arrived at his enormous mansion that Saturday afternoon around 2 o'clock, my hands were physically shaking as I stood on his front porch and rang his doorbell. My heart was pounding so hard in my chest, I thought I might have a heart attack right there before the door even opened. My son opened the door after a few seconds, and he actually smiled at me, which felt like the sun coming out after years and years of nothing but dark clouds. He led me inside through his marble foyer and down the hallway to his formal dining room, where I found just a small, intimate gathering waiting for me. His wife was sitting at the table looking polite but distant and uncomfortable, like she always did around me. My two grandsons were both there, and they actually seemed genuinely happy to see me walk into the room, which made my heart feel warm for the first time in months. It was just the five of us sitting around that huge, expensive dining table, and honestly, I felt so grateful just to be included after so many holidays and birthday celebrations and family events where I got forgotten about or uninvited at the very last minute with some weak excuse. I sat down carefully in one of the chairs and tried to make pleasant small talk without saying anything stupid that would make my son ashamed of me in front of his family. I was so incredibly careful and conscious of every single word that came out of my mouth because I desperately wanted this day to go well and not end in disappointment like so many other attempts at spending time together had ended over the past 5 years. My younger grandson Tommy, who was 10 years old, had apparently been planning something special without telling anyone else in the family about it. He suddenly disappeared from the dining room into the kitchen, and I could hear him moving things around and opening cabinets. A few minutes later, he came back carrying a homemade birthday cake that he'd clearly baked himself with chocolate frosting spread somewhat unevenly across the top, but done with so much care and effort. Right behind him came my older grandson Michael, who was 13, carrying handmade decorations that Tommy had created using construction paper and colored markers and tape. They'd apparently used their own allowance money that they earned from doing chores to buy birthday candles and a small wrapped present that Michael placed carefully next to my plate on the table. When they brought out that homemade cake with 85 candles stuck into the frosting and flickering with little flames, I felt tears starting to form in my eyes because this was the first time in so many years that anyone had made me feel like my birthday actually mattered to somebody. Tommy started singing Happy Birthday in his sweet young voice that hadn't changed yet, and everyone else at the table joined in, except for my son, who just sat there silently looking down at his phone and scrolling through something. I closed my eyes and blew out all 85 candles in several breaths and made a silent wish that maybe things could somehow get better between me and my son before I died. Everyone clapped politely, and Tommy beamed with obvious pride at his cake creation that he'd worked so hard on. My daughter-in-law stood up and went to the kitchen to get a knife and plates, and she cut slices of the cake and passed them around the table to everyone. The cake was honestly a little bit dry, and the frosting was way too sweet, but it was absolutely the most delicious thing I'd eaten in months because it was made with genuine love and effort by my grandson who still cared about me. We all ate our cake in relative silence, except for Tommy chattering excitedly about how he'd looked up the recipe online and decorated it himself, and how he hoped I liked chocolate because that was his favorite flavor. The atmosphere in the room felt almost warm and pleasant for those few minutes while we ate cake together like a normal family. I felt a rush of happiness and nostalgia remembering when my son was Tommy's age and used to make me cards and drawings for my birthday. Then, in a moment of joy and warmth and maybe too much comfort, I made what I thought was a completely harmless, joking comment directed at my son. I smiled at him across the table and said in a light, teasing voice, "So where's my gift from you? Your son Tommy prepared all this wonderful stuff for me with his own hands and money. What did my successful businessman son get for his old man's 85th birthday? Did you forget, or are you planning a big surprise?" I expected him to laugh it off, or maybe roll his eyes at my dad joke, or perhaps pull out a card from his pocket that he'd forgotten to give me earlier. I expected some kind of acknowledgement that today was supposed to be about family and celebration and showing love for each other. I never in a million years expected what was about to happen next in that dining room. I never expected that my joking comment would trigger the most humiliating and devastating moment of my entire 85 years of life on this earth. My son's face changed completely in an instant, like someone had flipped a switch inside his head and turned off every bit of humanity he had left. The polite smile he'd been wearing vanished and was replaced by a look of pure contempt and disgust that made my stomach drop and my hands go cold. He pushed his chair back from the table with a loud scraping sound that made everyone freeze and stop eating their cake. He stood up slowly and deliberately, like he was making a decision about something important. Then he started walking around the dining table toward where I was sitting, and my heart started pounding because something felt very wrong about the way he was moving. Everyone went completely silent watching him walk. I thought maybe he was coming over to hug me or pat me on the shoulder, or maybe hand me some gift he'd hidden somewhere in the room. My daughter-in-law looked confused and concerned. Tommy stopped eating his cake mid-bite and stared at his father. Michael put his fork down and watched nervously. The tension in the room became thick and heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm hits. My son walked right up beside my chair and leaned down close to my face, so close that I could smell the coffee on his breath and see the coldness in his eyes. For a split second, I thought he might whisper something to me privately that he didn't want the others to hear. Then he did something that I will never forget for the rest of my life, no matter how many years I have left. He deliberately gathered saliva in his mouth, making that horrible sound in his throat. Then he spit directly onto my cheek with force. Not a small accidental spray from talking too fast. Not a mistake. A deliberate, violent act of spitting his saliva onto his elderly father's face while his wife and children sat there watching in complete horror. I felt the warm wetness of his spit hit my cheek and immediately start running down my face toward my jaw and neck. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. I could feel every drop sliding down my skin. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I couldn't move or breathe or process what had just happened to me. "You deserve this gift, loser," my son said in a cold, flat voice I had never heard come out of his mouth before in 35 years. His eyes were filled with pure hatred as he stared down at me with my face covered in his spit. "This is what 85 years of being a pathetic failure earns you. This is what you get for being an embarrassment to me my entire adult life. This is what happens when you remind me where I came from. Be grateful I even let you into my house today, you worthless old man. Be grateful I waste my time acknowledging your existence at all." The words came out like venom and poison, and each one felt like a physical blow to my chest. The entire room went absolutely silent except for Tommy, who started crying softly, with tears running down his young face. Nobody else moved a muscle. Nobody spoke a word. Nobody came to my defense or told my son to stop or apologized for what was happening. I sat there completely frozen with my son's spit running down my face, unable to move my arms or legs or even turn my head. This was my son standing over me. This was the baby I held in the hospital when he was born. This was the little boy I taught to ride a bike and tie his shoes. This was the teenager I stayed up late helping with homework. This was the young man I gave $50,000 to start his business, and he just spit on my face on my 85th birthday and called me a worthless loser in front of his wife and children. I sat completely frozen in that dining room chair, with my son's spit running down my cheek and dripping onto the collar of my new shirt that I had bought specifically for this occasion so I wouldn't embarrass him. I couldn't move my arms to wipe it away even though I desperately wanted to. I couldn't breathe properly because my chest felt like someone had placed an enormous weight directly on top of it and was pressing down harder and harder. I couldn't process or understand that this was actually happening to me on what was supposed to be a celebration of my 85th birthday with my family. My mind kept repeating the same horrible thought over and over like a broken record player. My son just spit on me. My own son just spit on my face. The boy I raised just spit on his father. His wife sat directly across the table from me, looking down at her expensive plate, with her face turned completely away from where I was sitting. I could see shame written all over her expression, but she stayed absolutely silent and didn't say a single word to defend me or comfort me. She didn't hand me a napkin to wipe my face. She didn't tell her husband that he had gone way too far and crossed a line. She didn't stand up for me or acknowledge what had just happened, or do anything except sit there pretending she hadn't just witnessed her husband spit on his 85-year-old father. My older grandson Michael stared down at his lap with wide, frightened eyes, like he desperately wanted to disappear into the floor and never be seen again. Tommy was still crying quietly, with tears streaming down his young, innocent face as he watched his beloved grandfather being utterly destroyed and humiliated by his own father. Nobody in that room moved a single muscle to help me. Nobody offered me anything to clean the spit off my face. Nobody handed me a tissue or napkin or towel. Nobody said one word in my defense or told my son that what he did was wrong. Nobody stood up and told him to apologize immediately. The silence in that enormous dining room was somehow worse and more painful than the actual spit itself because it meant that everyone sitting there was basically okay with what just happened to me. It meant they all secretly agreed that I deserved this kind of treatment. It meant I was so worthless and pathetic and embarrassing that even my own grandchildren who claimed to love me wouldn't speak up or defend me when their father spit on my face and called me a loser. I sat there with my son's saliva slowly drying on my cheek, feeling more completely alone than I had felt in my entire 85 years of life on this planet. More alone than when my wife died and left me to raise a baby by myself. More alone than when I worked 3 jobs and came home to an empty apartment every night. More alone than all those birthdays and holidays I spent by myself because my son was too busy with his important life to include me. This loneliness was different because it came from being surrounded by family who watched me get destroyed and did absolutely nothing about it. My son stood over me with his arms crossed, looking completely satisfied and pleased with what he had just done to me. He looked like he had finally said what he had been wanting to say for years, and it felt amazing to him. He wasn't sorry for his actions. He wasn't shocked at his own behavior. He wasn't ashamed or guilty or regretful. He was proud. He was relieved. He had finally told his pathetic failure of a father exactly what he thought of him and gotten it off his chest after holding it in for so long. The contempt and disgust in his eyes as he looked down at me sitting there with spit on my face told me everything I needed to know about how he really felt. I finally moved after what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 or 40 seconds of sitting there in complete shock and humiliation. I reached up with my trembling right hand and wiped my son's spit off my face using my own palm, because nobody in that room was going to offer me anything to clean myself with. The spit was warm and disgusting against my skin, and I had to wipe it on my pants because there was nowhere else to put it. I stood up very slowly from that chair, feeling every single one of my 85 years in my aching bones and joints. My legs were shaking badly, but I forced myself to stand up straight and tall and look my son directly in his cold, contemptuous eyes without looking away or backing down. Then I reached into my front pocket and pulled out my key ring that had several keys attached to it. I held up the keys in front of his face so he could see them clearly and know exactly which keys I was holding. These weren't my car keys that opened my old Honda Civic. These were something much more important. These were the keys to his house. The keys to the massive $4 million mansion he was standing in right now. The keys to the property he thought belonged to him and represented his greatest achievement and proof that he had made it in life. "Thank you for the birthday gift," I said quietly, but very clearly, so everyone in that room could hear every word I was saying. "Here's mine to you. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property. This house you're standing in right now is mine, not yours. Mine. I'm taking it back." My son's entire face changed from satisfaction to complete confusion in less than a second. He laughed out loud like I had just made the stupidest joke he'd ever heard in his life. "What the hell are you talking about, old man? Have you completely lost your mind? Are you senile? This is my house. I bought this house 5 years ago with my own money. Get out of here before I physically throw you out myself." He reached forward like he was going to snatch the keys right out of my hand, but I pulled them back quickly and put them safely in my pocket where they belonged, where they had always belonged since the day this house was purchased. "You didn't buy anything," I said in a calm, steady voice, even though my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode in my chest. "I bought this house. The property deed is in my name. It has always been in my name since the day of purchase. You have been living in my property for the past 5 years. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and opened up my Photos app where I kept a digital picture of the official property deed. I held my phone screen up so he could clearly see his address, listed with my full legal name as the owner of record. I watched the confusion slowly drain from his face and get replaced by something completely different, dawning horror, pure, absolute terror. "This can't be real," he whispered as he stared at my phone screen. His voice had changed from confident and cruel to weak and desperate. I signed papers. "I've been paying a mortgage every single month for 5 years. This is my house. You're lying to me. That document is fake. You made this up somehow." He looked desperately at his wife like she could somehow explain how this was possible or tell him I was playing a trick on him. But she looked just as shocked and confused as he did because she had no idea either. "Check the county records yourself if you don't believe me," I said calmly. "Call your real estate agent. Call your mortgage company. Call anyone you want. You'll find out I'm telling you the truth. This house is legally mine, and you're getting evicted." My son grabbed my phone right out of my hand and stared at the deed photo like he couldn't believe what his eyes were showing him. His face went completely pale white, like all the blood had drained out of it in seconds. His hands started shaking visibly as he held my phone and zoomed in on the document to read every word. "This can't be right," he stammered in a voice I'd never heard from him before. "I signed closing papers at a title company. I've been paying a mortgage of $12,000 every single month for 5 years. This is my house. My name should be on this deed. You're lying. This document is fake or altered or something. This isn't possible." He looked at his wife desperately, searching her face for answers, like she could magically explain how this situation made any sense. But she looked just as confused and terrified as he did, because clearly she had no idea about any of this either. "You signed papers to live in my house," I said quietly but firmly so there would be no misunderstanding. "I bought this entire property 5 years ago as both an investment and a gift for you and your family. I paid the complete $4 million purchase price in cash using money I had been saving and carefully investing for decades while working my 3 jobs. You thought you were getting a traditional mortgage from a bank, but you were actually just paying me monthly rent that I was immediately putting into a trust fund for your children's future education. I set it up that way through my attorney so you would feel like you earned this house yourself and have pride in your accomplishment instead of feeling like I just handed you everything." I watched my son's face carefully as the horrible reality of the situation slowly sank into his brain. He had been living in my house this entire time, thinking it was his own personal achievement and success story. Every single dinner party where he bragged to his wealthy friends and business associates about his incredible mansion and how hard he worked to afford it. Every social media post where he showed off his beautiful property and talked about his real estate investments. Every moment of pride and satisfaction he felt about being a homeowner and providing this lifestyle for his family. All of it was based on a complete lie. It was never his house. It was always mine. And now, I was taking it back from him. "That plan to gift you this house died the exact moment your spit hit my face," I continued in that same quiet, steady voice. "You have exactly 30 days starting today to pack up all your belongings and get out of my property. I'm canceling the inheritance transfer that I had scheduled with my lawyer for next month. This house is mine legally, and I'm selling it to someone who will appreciate it. You will never own this property, no matter what happens. You will never receive a single penny from its sale. You just spit on your father on his 85th birthday and called him a worthless, pathetic loser in front of your wife and children. So now you get to find out what being actually worthless feels like when you're standing on the street with nowhere to live." My son's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. His wife started crying silently with her hand over her mouth. Tommy was still sobbing, watching his whole world fall apart. Michael sat frozen, staring at the table. The entire room had gone from a birthday celebration to complete devastating chaos in less than 5 minutes, and I felt nothing but cold rage inside my chest, where love for my son used to live. He destroyed that love when he spit on my face. Now, I was destroying everything he thought he had built. My voice was steady and calm, even though inside every part of me was breaking into tiny pieces that would never be put back together again. I walked out of that house immediately, without saying another single word to anyone in that room. I didn't hug my grandsons goodbye, even though Tommy was still crying and reaching toward me. I didn't look back at my son, who was standing there in complete shock, still holding my phone and staring at the deed. I didn't acknowledge his wife, who had started asking me to please wait and talk about this like reasonable adults. I just turned around and walked straight through that marble foyer and out the front door to my car and drove away from that mansion for the last time as any kind of guest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel properly. Tears were running down my face, blurring my vision, but I kept driving because I needed to get far away from that place before I completely collapsed. I drove straight to my attorney's office even though it was Saturday afternoon around 3 o'clock and his office was normally closed on weekends. I called him from my car while I was driving and told him this was an absolute emergency and I needed to see him immediately. He could hear the desperation and pain in my voice and agreed to meet me at his office within the hour. When I finally arrived and walked into his building, he took one look at my face and knew instantly that something absolutely terrible had happened to me. I sat down in his office in the chair across from his desk and told him everything that happened. I told him about the birthday invitation that gave me hope. I told him about the homemade cake my grandson made. I told him about my joking comment asking where my gift was. I told him about my son spitting directly on my face and calling me a worthless, pathetic loser. I told him about the humiliation of sitting there with spit running down my cheek while nobody defended me. My attorney listened to my story with his jaw clenched and anger in his eyes, and then he moved faster than I had ever seen him work in the 20 years he'd been my lawyer. He immediately started pulling up files on his computer and making phone calls to other attorneys he knew who could help. He drafted emergency eviction papers that same afternoon, citing that my son was living in my property without any valid lease agreement. He prepared official documents canceling the planned deed transfer for the mansion that we had scheduled to execute next month. He pulled up all the files on the vacation property I owned in Colorado that I had bought for the family to use 5 years ago, and he prepared paperwork to liquidate that property as well. He accessed the trust fund I had established years ago for my grandsons that currently held $800,000 and drafted brand new documents redirecting all those funds to various children's charities instead of my grandchildren. Every single asset and piece of property I had been planning to leave to my son and his family evaporated in that office over the course of about 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon. The $4 million mansion he thought was his greatest achievement? Mine to sell, and I was listing it with a realtor first thing Monday morning. The vacation property in Aspen worth $1.2 million? Mine to liquidate, and I was contacting real estate agents immediately. The trust fund for his children that would have secured their college education and given them a head start in life. Redirected to organizations that actually help children instead of raising them to watch their grandfather get spit on without defending him or speaking up. My son chose my 85th birthday to spit on my face in front of his family and call me a worthless failure who should be grateful he let me in his house. So I chose that same exact day to take back absolutely everything I had ever given him or planned to give him and leave him with exactly what he said I deserved, which was nothing at all. My son and his entire family were officially evicted exactly 30 days later on the precise date specified in the legal eviction documents my attorney filed with the county. I wasn't physically there to watch them pack up all their belongings and leave my property, but my attorney sent me photos and text updates confirming they had vacated the premises by the deadline. I sold that $4 million mansion within 6 weeks to a young couple with 3 kids who actually appreciated what they were getting and treated the transaction with respect and gratitude. I walked away with $2.8 million after paying all the taxes and real estate fees and attorney costs. I also sold the Colorado vacation property for $1.1 million and pocketed another $700,000 after all the expenses were handled. I took all that money and bought myself a beautiful, spacious apartment in a dignified upscale senior living community where the staff treats me with genuine respect and kindness that my own son couldn't manage to show me. The phone calls from my son started the very day after I filed the eviction papers and served him with official notice. He called me 17 times that first day alone, leaving voicemails that ranged from screaming fury and threats to desperate crying and begging for forgiveness. He called me every horrible name he could think of in some messages. He said I was cruel and vindictive and bitter and senile and evil. Then, in the very next voicemail, his tone would completely change, and he'd be sobbing, saying he was so sorry, and he didn't mean what he said, and please, could we just talk about this situation like adults? His wife started calling me too, asking me to please reconsider my decision for the sake of the children who had done nothing wrong. She said the boys were traumatized and confused and didn't understand why their grandfather was destroying their lives. My grandsons never called me directly, But I know for certain their father made them sit down and write long letters begging me to let them stay in the house and promising they would be better grandchildren. But I never answered a single phone call from any of them. I never responded to a single voicemail, no matter how desperate or angry or apologetic they sounded. I never opened or read the letters that his children sent to my address. I blocked my son's number and his wife's number and anyone else who tried to contact me on his behalf, including mutual friends and distant relatives. He spit directly on my face on my 85th birthday in front of his wife and children and called me a pathetic, worthless loser who should be grateful he let me into his house. Those words don't just go away with time. That humiliation doesn't fade from memory. That moment when I sat at his dining table with his spit running down my cheek while nobody in that room defended me or handed me a napkin. That single moment destroyed something deep inside me that can never be repaired or fixed, no matter how many apologies he offers. I'm 85 years old now, living in my comfortable apartment, and I finally have the one precious thing my son stole from me over the past 5 years of insults and humiliation: self-respect. I wake up every single morning in my nice bed where people smile at me in the hallways and treat me like I actually matter as a human being. I eat my meals in the community dining room with other seniors who listen to my stories with interest and share their own lives with me. I participate in activities and game nights and movie screenings where I'm welcomed and included. I have dignity again. My son wanted to show me on my birthday what I deserved according to him. So I showed him the exact same thing right back. He deserved to lose everything I had given him and planned to give him. He deserved to learn that cruelty and disrespect have real consequences. He deserved to find out that some humiliations are so deep you can't apologize your way out of them. I took my keys. I took back my house. I took back my money. I took back my self-respect. And I never looked back at the man who spit on his father.